Can spending $5 a day on ads really add 10,000 or more new listeners to your podcast? I highly doubt it. But I am just crazy enough to put up the money to see if I'm right or if I have 10,000 new listeners. Today's episode is brought to you by the Advancing Podcasting Community at advancingpodcasting.xyz. Because why would I do anything normal? It's a special community just for listeners and readers of Podcast Pontifications, and it's populated by like-minded working podcasters just like you who also want to make podcasting better. You're already listening to the show, so why not extend the conversation and your influence on the future of podcasting? Join us today at advancingpodcasting.xyz. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. I am not a fan of throwing good money after bad. I reject the notion that a paid-for marketing campaign is the best way to grow a podcast. It's not. As I've discussed on every single episode of Podcast Pontifications that I put out last week. I think it's much more much more important for us podcasters to get the fundamentals right before we spend any money on a podcast or our own podcast to grow it. I think that if we've done that, we've got the fundamentals right, and we've made a podcast that our most loyal listeners want to recommend to all the people in their lives, great. But spending money before we do that is just silly. Or before we know we've done that. We've got some proof of that. But you may be asking, all right, Evo, what if I've done all of those things? And in fact, I ask myself, well, hang on. Haven't I done all of those things? I mean, I just put out a survey last week, podcastpontifications.com/survey, if you haven't yet taken it. I just put out a survey last week, and I've already had roughly 10% of my audience give me really good feedback on that survey. And not all of them were fanboys, by the way. One person specifically rated my personality as average. Okay, I'll take it. It's been very helpful for me to look through those responses, to see what you're saying. I'm learning what's expected of my listeners so that I can deliver the unexpected. And I'm going to be tracking the changes that I'm implementing in the show. Spoiler, there is one of those happening a little later on today. But I'll be tracking those in the Advancing Podcasting Community, advancingpodcasting.xyz. I'll talk about it a little bit here on the show, but I'll save most of that for the community. Now, I've made it easy to recommend my show. I've changed my new episode release announcements on social media. They're much more longer content now, which are getting shared more, which is great. I'm now encouraging the forwarding of the newsletter, Podcast Pontifications, in your inbox. If you are not yet subscribed, now you are encouraged, or people who get that are encouraged to forward it to someone else. And I'm also continuing to master the craft of podcasting. That's never ending, obviously, but I try and get better at it every day. So if I've got all those things in place, as you might have all those things in place, maybe I am ready to start a marketing campaign. Well, I'm not convinced that's the right thing to do, but I'm going to try it. More to the point, I'm trying out a system that is reported to bring in around 800 new listeners to Podcast Pontifications every single month. Not clicks, not impressions, not, one-time drive-by downloads, but actual podcasters just like you who don't yet know about the show, who will become listeners of the show. And I'm going to do all of that with a $5 a day budget. Now, let me be real honest and clear with you. I do not think this is going to work. I've ran a lot of digital campaigns for a lot of clients over the decades. I've had budgets gigantic. I've had budgets tiny. And there are many reasons why I got out of digital advertising back in 2014. Questionable and sometimes downright disappointing results are just a portion of those. So I'm not the guy to implement this campaign, but I am, however, the person who has engaged another person, a person who is convinced this campaign is going to work. And that person is managing the entire process. I'm playing the role of client on this one. I'm going to be reviewing and approving the assets. I'm going to be reviewing and approving budgets and technical implementation. The entire thing that I have to do as a client, I will be doing. And there's a lot that has to be done with this. However, if those things and the $5 a day can really bring me 10,000 new listeners to Podcast Pontifications over the course of a year, I think it's worth it. I'm also going to be, as you know, completely transparent about the results of this campaign. I'm going to be sharing real, live numbers. My plan as such is to do a monthly check-in here live on the show, and I'll do one single episode of where we are, so I don't talk about this every single day. But I'm going to go much, much deeper and get a lot of feedback from the community in the Advancing Podcasting community, advancingpodcasting.xyz. Now, for now, we're just getting started on this campaign, and I'm being purposely vague on what it is that we're doing, simply because I don't want you rushing out and implementing this, wasting your time and possibly money trying to follow along when we've just gotten started. Now, once it's up and running, I will spill all of the beans so that if you actually do want to implement alongside me, you can. I'll let you do that. I will provide you the information so that you can do that, I should say. But again, I highly recommend on waiting to see what sorts of results we get, if any, before you jump on this bandwagon. Skeptical much, Evo? Yes. But as any good and true skeptic should be, I'm willing to change my position when I see evidence. So with that, stay tuned. Now let's get to the question and answer portion of the show. Matt Medeiros from Castos asked the following question. He said, I'd love to know how you will use the survey data, podcastpontifications.com/survey. I'd love to know how you will use the survey data to improve the show. What an excellent question, Matt. How about like this? This suggestion, adding in a quick question and answer bit to some episodes, was pulled directly from the responses from people who took the survey, podcastpontifications.com/survey. Now, I doubt that I'll do it on every single episode, but if you do have a question you would like me to answer, feel free to reach out. evo@simpler.media. You can ask it at evoterra on Twitter, or you can post it in the Advancing Podcasting community, advancingpodcasting.xyz, and I'll answer it there, or other community members might answer it there. Why not? That, Matt, is how I am using survey data to improve the show. Thank you for being the inaugural person to ask a question on the Q&A portion of the program. Now, if you received any episode, no. If you received any value, yes. If you received any value today from today's episode, please return that value. We call it value for value by going to buymeacoffee.com/evoterra and buying me a coffee, or better yet, buying a membership that sends a coffee to me each and every month. That's it. I shall be back tomorrow with yet another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers.
Podcast Pontifications is written and narrated by Evoterra. He's on a mission to make podcasting better. Links to everything mentioned in today's episode are in the notes section of your podcast listening app. A written-to-be-read article based on today's episode is available at podcastpontifications.com, where you'll also find a video version and a corrected transcript, both created by Alley Press. Podcast Pontifications is a production of Simpler Media. Find out more at simpler.media.